Okay, action research part two. This example is from Dr. Darla Linville, who's actually a professor here in our Advanced Studies and Innovation department here at Augusta University. And this is a study she did a number of years ago. And I just thought it was so cool, I wanted to share it with you all. The title of the study was More Than Bodies, Protecting the Health and Safety of LGBTQ Youth. And from her abstract, she wrote that this article presented data from a 6-month participatory action research project. Researchers included one doctoral student, so this was when she was a doctoral student, and 8 high school students in New York City, all of whom identified as non-heterosexual and or gender non-conforming. And this is basically what she found. The young people and her co-researchers, right? These 8 high school students that she was doing this participatory action research with. The young people speaking in the research presented in this article asked for a consideration of safety that included their need for accurate and comprehensive information about sex, sexuality, and gender, not just for themselves, but also for their peers, teachers, and school authorities. They also request that consideration of the health and safety of LGBTQ youth needs to include more than just anti-bullying protections and HIV/AIDS materials, and that biological arguments about sexuality and gender roles should be called into question by curriculum materials in favor of a fuller history of sexual and gendered identities. These changes, they suggest, may improve their level of belonging in their schools, a key factor in their physical and mental health and safety during adolescence. So you see the social justice aim in this work, as well as the participation of the community involved, that is LGBTQ high school students. Okay, so just thought that was a really good example. And all the examples that I'm talking about today are included in a folder on our course website. Okay, so I'm sure some of you are like, wow, this is really cool. I could really use this in what I do. And so how would you plan your own action research study? So there are a few steps that are talked about in our text and that we'll talk about now. First, you would determine if action research is possible in your setting and with your colleagues. There's some positions, some jobs where there just isn't enough flexibility to change current practices. So if you can't really change anything, then you can't implement an action. So first is determining whether it's even possible. Then is specifying the problem you want to study. Next is locating resources to help you address the problem. Next is identifying information you need to examine the problem, implementing the data collection, analyzing the data, developing a plan, implementing the plan, and reflecting on how it went. Okay, so let's talk about these. So first of all, determining if action research is possible in your setting. Is it appropriate and feasible to conduct an action research study? You want to systematically address a problem in your work situation or your community, or you want to advance your own professional development. Sometimes you want to do both. Is there an openness to learning new ideas and a willingness to experiment? Are there colleagues with whom you can collaborate? It's possible to do a study on your own. It's much easier and more interesting and possibly more useful to do it with a colleague. You would need some familiarity with quantitative and qualitative data collection, which you now have enough familiarity in order to do a basic action research study. And you need time to collect and analyze data and to devise a plan of action. Then next is specifying the problem that you want to study. Now, for some of us in our work, it's very clear what the problem or problems are. And it's just a matter of choosing which one we want to focus on first. As you're looking for a practical problem that you face in your own practice or community. it would help to record your thoughts about the problem and note your reflections as they occur. So journaling can be a very useful tool in an action research process. Um, I mean, we all, you know, complain about things in our work setting, right? But this is going a little bit beyond that. And in terms of recording our thoughts, talking with others, that kind of thing. And then write down the problem or phrase as a question to answer, or phrase it as a question to answer. So that's your research question, or your action question, maybe. Locate resources to help you address it. Now, one of the early things you might want to do is talk to your supervisor about what you're thinking about. For some of you, locating the resources first and then going to your supervisor might be the smart way to go. Resources that can help you study the problem. Literature and existing data may help you formulate a plan. So you have access to the university library as a student, and you can, find out what others have said about your problem. Asking colleagues for advice, particularly more experienced colleagues, can be a wonderful resource base in helping you develop potential solutions, gathering and analyzing data, or assisting with putting a plan into action. Identifying information you need to examine the problem is the next step. Inform your supervisor and other constituents and seek their approval. You may need to have the project formally reviewed and approved. In smaller organizations, that's usually not necessary, and in larger organizations, that is usually required. Decide who can provide the data, how many people will you study, how you access those individuals, what level of rapport do you need, what level of support can you expect to obtain from them, from your study, that kind of thing. Decide what type of data you want, quantitative, qualitative, or both, and of course it'll depend on your question, right? And what kind of information will help you best understand the problem that you want to address. Next, continuing on identify information you need is planning a strategy for gathering the data. Sometimes those nuts and bolts, nitty-gritty things are the most important to figure out. If you're going to do a survey, how much time do participants have to complete the survey? How much time do they have to engage in interviews? What incentives can you give to participants to get them to do something that's a little bit extra? You may want to limit the amount of data collection in your first study so that you have a manageable amount of information to analyze. You do a focus group, and the people chat while eating pizza for 2 hours. Well, that's 2 hours worth of recordings that you're going to need to transcribe and then analyze. So keeping things small at first is often the best strategy. And then implementing the data collection, systematically organizing and labeling the data, examining the quality of the information, keeping an accurate record of the information collected and who it's from, when it was collected, where you got, that kind of thing, and keeping a record of your own actions and reflections throughout the process. That's where that journaling or memoing can be really, really useful. And then it's almost like you're starting to write up your final product as you're going along, and that kind of can streamline things for you in the later steps. Next is analyzing the data. Again, keeping the data analysis manageable in order to identify useful information and formulating a plan of action. This can be informal. You don't necessarily have to, maybe you don't transcribe every single piece of the audio recording. You transcribe, maybe you listen to it first and then you transcribe those parts that stand out as being particularly useful for your question, for example. This is a less formal process than the kind of studies that we've been talking about so far in this course, because the goal is to get to the action part. And if you spend too much time on the research part, you don't get to the action part. Okay, quantitative data should be organized into tables to facilitate calculations. Excel is always great for that. reporting, usually you're just reporting descriptive statistics, okay? So your averages, your standard deviations, that kind of thing. Graphs are really useful and can be really helpful for communicating what your findings are. Qualitative data should be organized by type or by theme. And then you interpret the results and what you learned from them. Pay particularly attention to results that show change or provide unexpected information, okay? Particularly since when we're studying in our own settings, it's easy to have blinders on in terms of, oh, I've seen this in my setting already, this is what I believe is going on. And so the nice thing about having a systematic research process is that it opens up an opportunity for you to see things that are beyond your blinders, okay? And so you're looking for that unexpected information. And then if you show your results to others, and I would suggest even showing your raw data to a colleague, you can get a different perspective on the analysis. And then developing a plan for action. Now, some studies you're actually doing an action and evaluating it, and that's what like Jeannie was doing. Others, you're doing the study and then you're going to have a plan based out of that. So you can imagine that there was the New York high school students working with Dr. Linville, did this study, collected this information, and then they're going to do something with it, this information, right? You need to use your results to develop a plan of action. Base your ideas on the resources and data that you gathered, okay? You might try a new strategy. You might try to just refine something that already exists. You might want to be, informing key people about what you found, that kind of thing. Thinking creatively to develop your action plan. And again, your action might be to inform key people and ask them to do something about this problem. And also reflect on alternative approaches to the problem and share what you've learned with others. So it may be important, you may be able to get kind of like some broad-based support for actions or changes that you think should happen by sharing your research with others, with strategic others in particular. So implementing your plan and reflect. So you try out a potential solution, you see how it goes. Did it have an impact? Okay, so you're reflecting, you're possibly gathering more data. You might consult the original people you talked to. Has there been a change? Keep in mind that action research is a cyclical process. So, you gather data, you analyze and interpret, you implement an action, you gather data about that, that next phase, you analyze and interpret, and you implement another action, and you gather data, you know what I mean? The cyclical process. Reflect on what you've learned, taking that moment to pause and say, what have we learned, is always important, and sharing those reflections with others. You might not achieve an adequate solution the first time or the second time, and you might not need to try another idea, but usually you're getting valuable information, even if it's, well, I'm not going to do that again because that didn't work. So usually you're getting some information from doing the process. Okay, so in our course website, on this reference list, I've listed some examples of action research. And for example, there's one from a website called School Counselor Advocate, and I think this was a school counseling student did a project, and she was looking at this idea around possible selves for for youth who are in the foster system, in the foster care system, and looking at how it could increase academic motivation. And so that's one that I wanted to pull out to show our counseling students. And what I included if you go to that website, you'll see she did a PowerPoint presentation that you can look at to learn about what she did. The next is a journal article from the Journal of Sport Management. Frisbee, Crawford, and Durer did this really interesting study where they were working with low-income women in a particular community and who were trying to who wanted to access physical activity services in that community, but they were facing all kinds of barriers. And as you can imagine, with reductions in funding from municipalities like cities and towns and state sources, recreation sources have started to charge, right? So that can be a barrier for low income women, and also there were other barriers that they identified, and they looked at ways to overcome these barriers that were preventing these low-income women from accessing physical activity services within their community. So that was very interesting as well. Again, Darla Linville's More Than Bodies was from Policy Futures in Educate, a journal called Policy Futures in Education. And Jeannie Taylor's The Effects of on Student Achievement in Art Integrated Mathematics Classroom when students are engaged through art and communication is also a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so I hope this has been an enjoyable introduction to action research for you, and maybe some of you will be inspired to try something out. You have a good evening. Bye-bye.